So, hello everybody viewing this video, and of course, particular hello and welcome to Christine Caldwell, who is here with me in this virtual space. And Christine is the author of the book Oppression in the Body. I have it right here. But Christine also wrote other books such as Getting Your Bodies Back, Bodyfulness, and I also hear other books are in the works. So yes. It's very exciting. And let me just say a couple of things about Christine. Christine has been a mover and a movement teacher, as well as a professor and academic scholar of somatic psychology for decades. And she was at Naropa University for 35 years, and where she has been in many different administrative positions, as well as chairing the somatic psychology program for probably about 20 of those. So Christine has a very broad background, both somatically as well as academically, and that's a wonderful combination, I think. And on top of that, I think Christine also has a private practice as a somatic psychotherapist and as a supervisor. And she's teaching online and she's writing. So quite many threads, Christine. You bring a lot to the table. And I just want to say welcome again. I am so glad to be in this space with you, and our paths have crossed off and on through our academic work as well as through our affiliation with USABP. And here we are still exploring together.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Theresa, for having me, for asking me. This sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun. And I have admired your work for so long, also for decades, and really always look forward to any opportunity to play together like this. So yeah, thanks for asking me.
Yeah, no, it's great. And it is playing together. It's like how, I think there is a curiosity that keeps both of us moving forward, and that's why it's enjoyable.
Yeah.
And Christine, I was thinking, looking at your book, Oppression in the Body, I'm aware that you wrote a bit about your own journey towards this topic. But I was wondering if you could say a little more about it. How did this topic, oppression and the body, emerge for you?
Yeah, it's fun to be asked a question like that. And I just want to sort of take one half step back and just to note that I'm one of two co-editors of the book. And Lucia Layton is my other co-editor. Lucia was a student of mine and then a colleague of mine. And this is a project that we did together to pull the book together. And so the book has really many different authors. And so I just want to acknowledge all the people who helped this book come into the world. As I talk about my specific motivations and energy, that is about how the book came into being. And I would say that really, a large part of what happened for me was in the early to mid 2000s, Ray Johnson and I were doing some research projects together. We were using qualitative interview methods in order to work with people who identify as non-binary, as people of color, as kind of what we might say outliers and marginalized people. And we were very interested in looking at the intersection of trauma and oppression. And we were working on that in these interviews. And what happened for me as I was really coding all of these different interviews and also talking with Ray, was that there felt like there was very specific ways that different people in these interviews were talking about their the oppression of their body. But then I was noticing that there were also almost these very thread-like themes that went across all of these interviews, and that I really saw as much more deeply systemic on really very large scales. And so I got very interested in not just looking at specific populations about oppression, but that many different societies have a tendency to oppress the body itself, to see the body itself as less than, as wrong, as flawed, as sinful, whatever you want to say. So there's this almost umbrella over many different societies across time and across geography that look at the body as being less than. And in my fourth book, Bodyfulness, I tried to go into why that might be happening or what are some of the reasons for that. But so there was this idea of making the body wrong in general. And as we were getting better and better about talking about the specific kinds of ways that people of color, people that have disabilities, people who are different in some way, who might, be neurodiverse or whatever, people of color, all these people that can and are marginalized in a lot of different societies, different ways in different societies. Their stories are so important, they're so critical, but I didn't want to lose this idea that there is both these very detailed stories and detailed actions that we need to examine and work with, but that there's this underlying thrum of what I call somatophobia. This really kind of hatred or denigration of the body in general. And so I wanted to balance the two ideas. And so I called them somaticism, which I think is the oppression of specific bodies for their specific status and identity. And then look at somatophobia, which is the oppression of the body in general.
So really it was that inquiry with Ray that developed further into this particular book. Yeah. And my sense is when I read your chapter, there is something also about, you spoke about that we need to move towards more inclusivity and really move beyond body binaries. And the first step is to identify those body binaries and then to move beyond that. Can you say, what do you mean with that? Or how do we do this?
Yeah. And I really loved that question when you asked it. I think it's a kind of human nature, or certainly the nature of a lot of developed civilizations, that we have a tendency to study things by putting them into boxes, to categorizing them and kind of isolating them as a way to study them. And so saying that they're different or distinct, and they're in this category and they do this and they have these features and these actions. And I saw that so much when I was teaching neuroscience for a long time at Naropa, and I saw how many neuroscience books wanted to say this part of the brain does this part of the brain does that, and not having a sense of how the brain is actually quite modular and quite networked, to the point where different parts of the brain can take over for injured parts of the brain. And the brain is a lot more plastic than we give it credit for. And I feel that the body is that same way. And so the quality of binaries, you're either this or this, is that kind of boxing strategy that, underlies and infuses so many different beliefs and attitudes that we've been taught. And so I'm sort of on a quest, I guess you could say, to really help us make a huge transition out of looking at things and studying things as kind of in boxes or in binaries, but in categorical, separate ways, and looking at things on continuums. And so, for instance, we see gender as occurring along a continuum rather than as a binary. And when you start saying that continuum, and then you really sort of play along that continuum, and that also the other issue is not having to nail it down, right? You don't have to sort of, unless you want to, sort of go into one part of that continuum and stay there. That's who I am. There can also be a fluidity across your lifetime, and we always have seen that there's a kind of fluidity in different social circumstances as well. Identity is not as fixed as we think it is. And so it can be real solid, and sometimes in our life, I think we need it to be really strong and solid in order to save it, to protect it, to stand up to forces that are designed to oppress it. But I think also the body itself is really interested in this kind of fluid continuum, this ability to adapt to different stages of life, to different social interactions, to different moods even. So that's what I'm trying to support and promote, is that, again, on a, we can use gender, for instance, as a very easy example of binaries, but there's lots of boxes that we inhabit that we don't need to sit in that box and seal all the covers on.
So really what you're saying, Christine, is how can we become more nuanced in our perceptions, in our dialogue? And distinctions are there, but they don't have to be black and white. They don't have to be separated out.
Yeah, and they don't have to be permanent.
Right. So I'm wondering, it seems to me another one of those continua is when we talk about the social body and the self-experienced body.
Yeah.
So can you say a little bit how to integrate that spectrum?
Yeah, and this is such a critical question. And when you gave it to me, yesterday, I think I was looking at it, and I was really thinking about how my thinking has evolved in this question. And I realized that one area that I'd like to talk about in terms of how my thinking has evolved over the years with this idea of the personal body and the social body. One is my study of phenomenology and looking at lived experience as a way that we can understand, again, a kind of continuum from the personal body to the social body. And that really took me into some pretty, strongly shown or demonstrated research on how much our bodies are social as well as personal, that they're public as well as private, certainly, but that they're socially mediated and socially constructed. And there's where we go and we, say hello to feminist theory, right? When we talk about the socially constructed body, feminist theorists really first pioneered that idea. And so, but I was also coming to it out of a kind of concern that I saw in my private practice. And, I live in Boulder, and Boulder has its own kind of culture and way of operating in the world. And there's a lot of, let's say there's a lot of seekers in Boulder. Let's do a shorthand on that. And I was in my private practice, I actually became kind of flustered and concerned that I was seeing so many people in my private practice whose sole interest was personal exploration, and that knowing something was always about going inside. And certainly, a lot of us, especially me as an older person, and I was born in the 50s, I was born in the height of the McCarthy era in the US, we actually needed to create a lot of the philosophies from the 60s that said, go inside, look at yourself, be your own authority, really do that. But I've become somewhat concerned that on a very local level, like when I'm working with someone therapeutically, that there can be a bias towards just looking inside for a source of somatic intelligence, somatic authority, somatic rights. And by doing that, we cut off the richness and also the complexities of the social body, and the fact that we can't get away from the social body. We are a social body. Our body is constantly being influenced by social interactions. We literally feel like a different person in some social environments than others. And so I feel that actually sort of somatic disciplines need to have an appreciation of that particular continuum as well, and really make sure that we develop strategies and methods that address all of that continuum from the social being to the private being. And this is also an inclusivity issue, because for many different cultures, the body is more social. And other cultures, it's more personal and private. And that is a cultural continuum, what we might say from individualistic cultures to communal cultures, that the body maps onto. And so we can understand and appreciate, let's say, a more communal culture by understanding and appreciating more the social body. And as I've taught I think I've taught on 5 continents or something over the years. And as I teach people of very vastly different cultures, this has been very sharply in my view to see how different people, I'll take the same exercise to Korea and Argentina and Japan and Germany, and it goes down differently. It is moved differently, and it's related to differently. So yeah, I'll stop there because I'm curious about what you think about that.
Well, I just feel like it's almost like this is one of the next in somatic work. And I think at least, how it arose in the Western world, there was this focus on the inner and really coming back to even attending to it. Because there is clearly on one hand a fragmentation. There's so much what do you call it, the somatophobia, that we're just not at home in our bodies. So the turn towards the inner seems essential. But at the same time, if we don't recognize the systemic embeddedness, it becomes very myopic.
Yeah, that's a lovely word to use. Myopic is a good word for it, because it really will then exclude vast amounts of information that we actually need to be somatically literate, to be engaged, and to, I think, promote our own well-being.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and I think it feels like it's sort of that kind of orientation is pushing through in many different ways, and thankfully so.
Yeah, very true. I agree.
And maybe with that, I want to sort of come back to your book and just sort of ask, you have quite a spectrum of authors in there, and really different topics in terms of disability, queerness, incarceration, Black bodies, violence of the medical interventions, all of that. How was it for you to put this book together with such a diversity of topics and authors?
Yeah. Well, to say what a sort of platitude is not the quite right word, but sort of a stereotyped phrase, it was a little like herding cats. But then I think that any edited book is like that. To particularly in an edited book, you're released from the burden of writing the whole thing, but you have this administrative function where you're trying to create a thread that can unify all the voices while helping each voice be distinct. And so I hope that we pulled that off. But it's the diverse authors is one of those importances. And I'll tell you that I was actually approached by the publisher and asked to write this book on my own as a single author. And I said, no, no way could I ever begin to do that. It has to be an edited version, an edited book. And they reluctantly agreed, to their credit. They said they don't like edited books very much, but they saw my logic, and so let it happen.
Good for you.
Yeah, thanks. I had to insist. But the other thing that I think is really important is that we wanted to have multiple voicings or multiple types of narratives, not just different kinds of people, but different kinds of narratives, which is why we have in there poetry as well as, I'm an academic nerd, and I write that way. And so you can see my chapter is, kind of nerdnik with all the references and blah, blah. And then you get another one that is kind of a beautiful rap about one's own personal experience. And then another one that is really drawing from Native traditions or African-American traditions in terms of actually how you write. It's not just the content, but the form has to really be able to hold a diversity of narratives. And so that's what I hope we also pulled off, is that the form itself has to be compatible with what you want to say. And so we gave a lot of freedom to our cats to write in ways that felt right to them.
And I really feel you were incredibly successful in that way.
Thank you.
Because it's like the medium is the message.
Yeah, exactly.
And to allow for a richer territory is really important here. And so I'm wondering, as you put this project together, as you completed it, what particular questions or insights or thoughts were you left with?
Yeah. Could I say that this is a kind of, how did the project stimulate me to figure out where I wanted to go next?
Yes, I would think so, because whatever you're left with, that's where you're going to go next.
Good point. Good point. That's a continuum as well, from the past to the present to the future. Yeah. So where that book took me was, which is very common, which is, okay, we got out the main points. We got out the really large, glaring issues and things that needed to be said. And now it's time to drill down. Now it's time to really examine the details and also understand what that means about really well-crafted actions. Because this is not work that can or should stay theoretical or just to be read, right? So for me, I always want to go back to the complexities of the lived experience of the body. So the complexities of the moving body. And so for instance, actually, next week, I'm going to do, and Ray is going to interview me. Ray Johnson is going to interview me. And we're going to talk about movement as liberation. And so I'm getting really interested in this word liberation. And so how, for instance, do we liberate movement from being colonized, from movement being colonized? For instance, how do we liberate sensory awareness, sensory processing as a decolonialization? How do we liberate our breathing as a kind of decolonialization also? So I'm very interested in that, and also in terms of the social body at the same time there. So I had one thing written down that I just want to make sure. So lately I've been getting interested in liberation psychology, and I don't know if you know it very well.
Yes. I wouldn't say I know it well, but I am very aware of it.
Yeah. And so I'm increasingly aware of it, and I need to learn more. So I think that's one of the things where I'm going, is learning more about liberation psychology. But as is usual, we go into these different areas, let's say liberation psychology, and they have no body in them. They're all sort of abstract and mental, and see people as cognitive beings, and we really have to come into all these areas and just help them get into their bodies. So what's the body of liberation psychology might be part of my next work that I think would be a kind of volume 2 of this book.
Right. Well, that's great.
Yeah, I think so too. It really, it gets me going.
I mean, it feels like it's sort of the logical next step. How to take it and really bring it into application in a very direct way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, to really get the nuance of it. So a sort of precision to it.
Right.
So, yeah.
And maybe Christine, as a way to bring this to a close, your book was published in 2018, and now we have 2021.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, can you see, are things shifting a little bit? And if so, what do you notice? In what way are they shifting when we think about this topic of the social body, the integration of the social and the experienced body, oppression in the body. What do you see is happening in the collective?
Well, I would say that it's pretty much all good news. In fact, I was reading something in the New York Times book review section like last week, and they were talking about, they said the tsunami of new books on critical race theory, and particularly books about race and dealing with race that are a lot by people, mostly by people of color. And so that's really great to hear. That's really great to hear. The other thing that's great to see is that pretty much all of the private trainings in somatic work, as well as the academic trainings in somatic work, now see the absolute necessity of really centralizing these ideas of inclusivity and social justice into whatever they do. And so, you know, of course, there's still lots and lots of work to be done, but this is so good to see in just the space of those few years, because when we were asked to write this book, when I was asked to write this book, it was really, there wasn't hardly anything else out there, particularly about the body and oppression. There was a lot of really juicy articles and some chapters, but, you know, nothing that tried to kind of pull it together very well. And so I think we need more books like this that are specific to the body. There's no tsunami there, but at least there's a steady tide. And hopefully your students will be part of that tide coming in and really nourishing this particular shoreline.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. There is something has been initiated in that regard, and it will hopefully just continue to grow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it will need many authors to do that.
Yes,
so
exactly.
At least we want to create a big wave. It may not be a tsunami, but we want to create a big wave.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah. I like the idea of a tide.
Yes, and I hope that your book on movement as liberation, or whatever the main topic will, but it will all go into that same direction and orientation. So
yeah.
I'm very curious to see where you land with that.
Oh, thank you, Theresa. Thank you. And I look forward to hearing more about what you're up to as well as a writer, as well as a researcher and teacher. So right. I want to sort of use this platform right here to ask you to write a chapter in any kind of book 2 of this that might come up.
Well, what's exciting, Christine, is I think we all have sort of a particular thread that we are developing, and yet we're also finding that the thread is embedded in the larger systems. Yes. So yes, and as you know, my thread has always been around development, embodiment as a developmental process. So I'm happy to have more of a discussion about that.
Super. Let's do that. Let's put on our idea caps about that.
Yes. And Christine, thank you so much for taking the time. It's really, it's great for our students to hear from you directly. And it's just fun to be in the same space with you.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much, Theresa, for having me. It's been an honor.
Absolute a pleasure for me.
Good.
So thank you, Christine.
You're welcome.